Welcome back to Opening the C-Suite. I'm Mike.
Corey?
And we had a previous episode which came audience requested, which got us down this trail of talking about when it does not work out with a senior executive and how the CEO, the board goes through the process of deciding and executing on removing a senior executive, which is a very real thing that happens. Now, that episode kind of gave us a launching point for talking about today's topic, which is the decision between an internal hire or an external hire. So an internal promotion or an external hire, which from an employee standpoint, I think there's a natural mindset of I'm continuing to climb the ranks when that C-suite role opens up. Right. If I'm next in line, it's naturally mine.
Right.
Now the context of some of the reasons why it doesn't work out with a senior leader actually play a role in whether the board decides on an external hire versus that internal promotion. So we're going to open that up now. Corey, you've been in much larger companies than me. I come from a startup scenario where we had some of this, but can you kind of lay the groundwork for us of the logic that goes into you're the CEO or the board thinking about internal promotion or external hire for a senior role?
Yeah, it's all got to do with candidate and what the needs are in the moment, right? So, as I've said before, when you are letting go an executive, it is an opportunity to rethink the organization. And sometimes rethinking the organization is a reason to let go an executive because the needs have changed. And when you're doing that, it becomes very clear at times like, oh, this person has the skills. But if we organized it in this way, that person succeeds. I can't count how many times I was on a whiteboard saying, well, this person I see him as a high potential, but not for the way that team is structured today. But if the team was structured like this, what would I do? Should I restructure it or not? Right. So, but as the individual, the very first thing is how do you expose yourself as that high potential?
Yeah. Right.
Right. And a lot of it is through your accomplishments. It's not through kissing up to others.
Yeah. Right.
It's through getting the job done and showing competence.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's say I've, shown competence. I've got the track record. And now I'm next in line for whatever that kind of C-suite senior leadership role is. And I don't get it. They go with an outside hire. What may have been the factors that led to the outside hire?
Yeah. So number one is it could be that you're just lacking certain parts of experience, and it's fair to ask. Right. But maybe you hadn't managed as big a team as this is. Okay. Maybe this has parts to the role you don't truly understand, and that's the killer, right? How often someone sees a manager and they go, oh, I know their job, but they know 60%, but that other 40% is this over here. It may be your relationship with others on the executive team that they don't respect or they don't want to see you there, and you should work to figure those things out.
Which means your stakeholder management and growing through a company is far beyond just your individual umbrella, right?
Absolutely right, because when you become part of the management team, that is your peer group.
Yeah, right.
And so that peer group is going to more times than not need to bless that you've been moved in, or at least not create pain for the CEO if you are moved in, right? So, first and foremost, number one reason a person might be passed up is they're lacking something in their skill set that we think is needed at this moment. Yeah. Okay. And you should work to figure out what that is. Yeah. And it's okay to raise your hand and say, I'm aiming for that in my career. Yeah. What could I do in the future so that I would be considered? Yeah. That's totally acceptable.
So your first CEO role, which we've got a whole nother episode on first becoming a CEO, but came through, if I recall correctly, a multitude of promotions at a larger company.
It was, I was brought in as the COO.
Oh, okay. So you were actually brought in more senior than I thought.
Yeah,
okay.
So I was brought in as the COO, and the founder CEO decided it was time for him to step aside. Okay. And came into my office one day and said, we think you're the candidate.
Okay. Now, when you were first brought in, was that already part of the thinking?
It was not a promised. It was suggested that in the future it could be considered.
Yeah. Okay.
But when I got in, I realized the head of sales was told the same thing, and somebody else. So it was like, it wasn't a problem. But
all right. So actually, maybe my question is more relevant to a previous company. But I was curious when you mentioned like these areas that a rising executive has to work on to be at whatever that next senior level of management is. How did you get that guidance when you were like getting to maybe not your first CEO, but the first like C-suite role?
Yeah, first and foremost is understanding what outside of my day-to-day would be expected of a leader. So a lot of people think I'm really proficient at my day-to-day. I am really good I'm a customer success leader, and I know how to talk to customers, and I know our product inside out, and so on. Yeah. And you go, okay, but how good are you at defining the plans that others do? How good are you at monitoring that? How good are you at delivering feedback? How good are you at packaging up information to deliver to the board? How good, and do they see those skills? You don't have to do it every day, but do they see that you could have those skills, right? Yeah. So how did I learn it? I had a boss that I asked.
Okay.
And I went to him, this is, earlier in my career, and I was like, what do I need to do there? Yeah. And was lucky enough to have a gentleman who I still speak with to this day. And even though it was 30 years ago, we worked together, and he would say, over dinner, this is what happens there, and this happens here. And they don't look for that. They look for this. This is what really works. Find a mentor. Yeah. Find a mentor, someone who can help you understand what are the things expected of the next role. Yeah. And then you look for opportunities to partake.
Yeah. Well, and on that point, the mentor didn't necessarily, I don't know the dynamic, but come to you. You went and asked questions. You brought it to the table. Yeah. Even by asking the question, you actually differentiate yourself to a degree as, hey, this is somebody who wants to, move to that level, and they're asking the right questions.
And absolutely. And the other thing that really worked in my favor, I was always willing to try something. Yeah. Okay. And what I mean by that, some people are very steady, and then I take this role and I go here. There was multiple times very early. I was at a really fast-growing company in the 90s, and it was like, oh, we need you to do that now. All right, I'll try that. Yeah. And then one time I even said, I think this is a job that needs to be done. That's good. Why don't we put you in that job, right? Yeah. So just having the flexibility to try new things and move around gets the attention of others in the organization. Yeah. Okay. And then how do you not just deliver results, but communicate results for what you have done?
Yeah. Now, everything you just described there of that sort of like go-getter, widen your own purview and umbrella is what working at an early startup is all about. Yeah. You're describing it at a larger company too. So from my vantage point of this question of when do you make an external hire versus an internal promotion, for a while, like with my first company, it was all internal promotion of whatever the next role was, because just the business expanded. Now we have a need, and hey, Eric, you're up. And so you're doing that, and it develops, I think, on the one hand, this culture of, growth and internal development. Yep. But then it also creates kind of this vacuum of, we may be doing things a certain way just because the founders thought that was the best thing we could figure out. Yeah. So at a certain point, I remember us, kind of as the founding team, we were sort of our full exec team at the time, having to ask like, all right, do we just need an outside perspective too? So at some point you're trying to balance, what's in the melting pot of experience and perspective, because if it's all internal promotion from a startup standpoint on, it's like, are we growing beyond what we did at, ground zero? Right. And so that's part of what goes into the thinking too.
Yeah. I mean, if you need to inject something into the organization, if you have it there or not. Yeah. Right. I mean, we need somebody who's much better at A, B, and C. And sometimes you can promote an internal person and bring somebody alongside them to help them. Sure. But sometimes you need it from the outside. Sometimes you need to rethink your sales process. Yeah. It's not going to happen if you just promote the internal people. Yeah. It's just not. Yeah. Now the other side of it is, as an executive, how do you figure out who are the people in the organization that might be able to be promoted?
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you approach like leadership development bullpens and programs like that? Because that was something I always found was in that high importance, low urgency quadrant. Yep. And it was something I was passionate about, but I don't know that I always nailed it, because at the end of the day, you need, so-and-so selling versus practicing management. And so like to prioritize the time and that bandwidth, I'm just curious, how'd you approach it?
And it was focusing, well, first off, I worked with my head of people to make it a responsibility of one of their goals every year to manage a high potential program in the company. Yeah, okay. And their job was to work with each executive, identify who were the key high potential people. Yeah. And we would always discuss it in the exec team meeting at least a couple times a year and say, who are the people we see?
Yeah, so you got to have
and everybody kind of gets a view of who are those people in the organization that we think are good. And then from there is where it gets a little stickier depending on the org, depending on your budgets, But if you have high potential people, you want to try and give them opportunities. we got a special project, can I pull them in? We're doing, some activity over here, can they be part of it? Should I have a meeting where we talk strategy and I invite a couple of them to it? And I would do stuff like that, right? How do you broaden their range? And more importantly, I would always make sure I had one-on-ones with those people. I would make sure I got to know them a little bit better. Great idea. And just kind of pull them in.
Yeah, it's kind of it's not your extended team as the CEO, but you can't spend the same amount of time across your whole multi-100 person org, but you've got your direct reports, and then you've got the skip levels, but then you're kind of rising stars. You're figuring out some cadence of your lunches with them, coffees, whatever.
So I was also overboard maybe on if someone got hit by a car planning.
Yeah, okay.
And I was always very big on, and I'm always big on, and this goes back when I had an organization of over 1,000 people, I would always be like, of my top 5 leaders in that group, that one got hit by a car, who? I don't know. Well, that's a problem.
Yeah, right.
I better figure that out, right?
Yeah.
And, and it would be a constant running dialogue for me of if someone, what would I do? And sometimes I was going to change the org up and move those 2 teams together, whatever that is, but that brings up, who in the org could I put in place?
Yeah.
Or I don't have anybody, we'd have to hire from the outside. What would we do in the interim? Who could be an interim leader, right? Yeah. And it would expose that to myself a lot.
Well, here's what's going through my mind as you describe that is if I'm the internal rising executive and that spot in the C-suite opens up and they go with an external hire.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some question going through that person's mind of, well, should I stick around here or go somewhere else? And you kind of expect that too as CEO. If I don't promote that person right now, then I leave. But what you just described is the CEO's thinking about this, kind of backup plan always.
Always.
And so it's not necessarily you have to now jump because somebody's blocking your spot. The org could actually shift design.
Yeah.
In the near future.
But look, I had that where I was an executive passed over for the next step up.
Okay.
I had a CEO who retired. I was one of 3 executives interviewed. They actually tried to hire somebody outside and told all of us they were doing that, and that person turned the job down.
Okay.
So they decided to go with another internal candidate, bypassing 2 of us.
Yeah.
So now I was like, oh, so I'm not even second on the list, right? I mean, because we went outside, we went inside. And look, it can be hard. That was a scenario where I knew I was now limited.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to go anywhere. I left the organization. Yeah. If you're earlier in your career, you look and say, I went and talked to people and I said, what was the issue? And, at the time they told me, well, you're too young and we're public and we need this and we need that. And I was like, I don't agree with any of it. So I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
But they didn't do what they needed to do if they really wanted to keep me. What they did is said, we're going to give you all these extra options. We're going to pay you to stay here and, don't worry about it. And I was like, oh, okay. So my career has stopped here.
Yeah.
And you're just going to pay me off to stay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. If I were a different executive, somebody comes to me and says, well, what do I do? Here's the kind of things I would look for in you.
Right,
Here's the things that I think
you want to keep growing the individual.
That's right.
Well, it's interesting that you say that even at the highest, like that was for the CEO role.
Yeah.
I'm thinking if there's a senior leadership role or a C-suite role, that's where there actually may be multiple opportunities. I mean, maybe not, but the reorg potential that you're talking about.
Often happens. Yeah. We had a situation at a company I led that, we had a executive step out, promoted someone else up, and another person felt a bit passed over and appropriately came and said, look, I think I might be limited here.
Yeah.
And we said, well, here's the things that we haven't seen from you.
Yeah.
Stick it out. Yeah. You're probably, and eventually that person did get more responsibility, promotion. And, I believe felt better about it. I will say had many, many conversations with the person about it, but I believe felt better about it.
Yeah.
But I think what we did right as a leadership team is we knew this person would be bothered. We went to the person and then we, laid out for him what we thought had to happen. And then we acted on it. Yeah. We let it happen.
Yeah. One thing I would always try to make a point of doing is have the individual who may have been the internal promotion be part of the interview process for the external candidates.
Has that worked for you?
Well, it has. I think it's been, instrumental in that there were some examples I can think of where that individual said, you know what, I can learn more from them coming in.
That's good.
Than if I take it. And if that occurs, now all of a sudden, like that individual is going to be the champion of that person coming in.
Yep.
That was going to be my next question for you is you've actually been the outside hire. I think that COO role you mentioned. You've been the outside hire where somebody internally could have been that COO. How did you then approach being the external guy and, orienting the culture around you being in the role and now becoming one of them?
You don't dictate the terms. You make adjustments over time.
Yeah. Okay.
Like I didn't walk in the room. This is what we do now. This is how it works. I've seen that.
You
executive.
share it. All right. Yeah.
But I've heard that term used. Right. Yeah. I've seen that type of executive walk into
people
a room.
Still saying that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. But they'll walk in and go, I'm in charge now, and this is how we're going to do it. Like, no. Walk in and like, tell me about your team.
Yeah. Do your listening tour or whatever.
Yeah. And people will use the term listening tour, and I sometimes feel it's not just about listening. It's about creating your to-do list.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's how do I get because I've seen people go, I did the listening. Like, what did you do with what you learned?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Right. That's the key. It's only useful if you're going to do something with what you've learned.
Sure.
But yes,
Agreed.
That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
But you have to go in. You have to know what kind of engagement you have. And we've talked about leadership meetings and what cadence do you want? How are you going to get status reports?
Yeah. You
want to set those kind of models in place. But you also want to make sure that you're taking into account what they've done before, how they've operated before. And let's be honest, you're a new executive coming in because there's something deficient there.
Yeah.
So everything they did before wasn't perfect.
Yeah, right.
But you can't walk in and say everything you did before wasn't perfect.
Yeah, right.
What's always shocking. Every time I've walked in from the outside, everybody looks up and says, "Good, we needed somebody. Here's everything that was."
Yeah, right.
Every time.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
So there you go. So if you're looking to get promoted from the inside, there's a bunch of pointers in there on what you should be doing. And if you're an executive, you need to always be thinking about who are our internal candidates and what are their strengths and weaknesses and what would it mean if we had to shift the organization around.